Welcome to the 2023 Watershed Congress. My name is Soraya, and I am a member of the Watershed Congress Organizing Committee. And tonight I will also be your moderator for this session, which is PFAS in Pennsylvania, current actions to address this toxic peril. And we are pleased to present our speakers to you for this session. Right now, I'm going to turn it over to Tracy.
Hello, I'm Tracy Carluccio. I'm Deputy Director of Delaware Riverkeeper Network, and thank you very much for joining us here tonight. Just quickly want to tell you what the agenda is, because we're not going to be introducing ourselves one at a time. We'll be seeing a community video that lasts about 5 minutes, and then we'll be hearing from Joanne and then Hope, and then I will come back and do a basics on PFAS in Pennsylvania and also on the national scale. And then Anneke is going to be covering PFAS and fish and wildlife. And then we're going to open it up. We should have at least 10 minutes for Q&A. So feel free, as Soraya said, to go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A, and we will cover them as soon as everybody has made their presentations. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over back to our admin so they can start the community video featuring Joanne Stanton and Hope Grosse. Thank you.
I actually hate this house. I just feel dirty when I'm here. We grew up outside. We grew up playing in this grass and in the woods. You grow up thinking you're in this safe environment, in this safe home, and living this perfect life, and then you get to 25 and you find out you were poisoned.
We were completely oblivious to everything. It probably wasn't until the Warminster Naval Air Base became a Superfund site. That was the first time I realized that the water could be in jeopardy.
We were offered water testing, which we had done several times. And we were told, although the chemicals were there in the water, they weren't at a level to be concerned. A few days after the last test, they said, stop drinking the water immediately.
Warminster is lovely. It's such a nice feeling town. There are these, leafy streets you can walk down. It's really sort of idyllic. It's also, unfortunately, deeply polluted. And I think how polluted it is only coming into focus now that people have been exposed for their whole lives. So people who are in their 40s and 50s now are realizing that these lovely childhoods they had, playing outside and in their friends' houses, and sometimes on the military base that is just across the street from their homes, that it left them exposed and vulnerable and sometimes sick.
Right after I had my third son, we found out that my oldest child, Patrick, who was 6 years old at the time, just getting ready to enter first grade, he was having migraines for the last few years, but they were getting more intense. He was having nauseousness, vomiting in the morning, and then having problem with his balance. And we took him to the doctors, and the MRI revealed a brain tumor. The doctors came in our room, and they started pummeling us with questions. Where do you live? Where did you grow up? Do you ever work with pesticides? Do you live near a farm? Do you live under high tension wires? And these are questions that I never would have even thought about.
And I was looking into what would cause kidney cancer because it didn't run in my family. I don't have any history of it. Don't have any history of multiple sclerosis in my family. So I looked into it and found an article about the chemical, the PFOA and PFOS, that was in fire retardant foam that's used at air bases. We were less than a half a mile away from the air base.
This is where they burnt the fires, the firefighting foams. It was a drill site. We would come when we'd hear the sirens and run over to the fence, and they'd be putting all the fires out. They did this a couple times a week, maybe 3 times a week, and it just was our entertainment.
When it really hit home and things really started to fall into place, where I just instinctively felt it really did, was when a neighbor a few doors down, who also grew up on my street, had a son who had a brain tumor. And I thought, wow, that's odd. You know, pediatric brain tumors are rare. So for 2 of us on the same street to have a child with a brain tumor, you know, this is not normal. A lot of people have moved out, but some are still here. I have another friend she died, Patty, of a brain tumor, but it started out as melanoma, cancer. Preston's, so many of them. This is my house that I grew up in, right here. Right there. This is my friend Brendan's house across the street. He also has a child with a brain tumor. He suffered great many losses to cancer. His mother, his father, his brother.
Military bases tend to be very, very polluted. The chemicals there, you see pesticides, you see solvents, you know, PCBs.
I knew about heavy metals. I knew about the mercury and the lead and heck of chromium. We were exposed to PFAS, but we were exposed to a heck of a lot more. We haven't caught up with looking at singular chemicals and what the health effects of these are. We are far away from ever being able to study, if we even can, how these all combine and what the health effects could potentially be.
I've, since 25, struggled with cancer diagnosis and testing and autoimmune disease and other tumors. I feel like I'm in remission. What does remission mean? It means that I'm not actively fighting cancer, but in my mind, I fight cancer every day. It's always in the back of my mind.
There are hundreds of military bases where firefighting foam has been used. These chemicals have leached out into the waterways and eventually into the oceans. They're in all sorts of wildlife and people all over the world. And we're now realizing that they have a whole range of health effects. In terms of a cleanup, it feels too slow and too late. And I think especially to the people who are living with it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joanne Stanton. I just want to let you know that I grew up in Warminster, Pennsylvania, about 2 miles down the road from 2 separate military bases that used AFFF, which is the foam used by firefighters that contains PFAS, also known as forever chemicals. My PFAS story started when I was a young mom. I was naive. You know, I thought that if water came out of my kitchen faucet, it had to be safe. I had no idea just how weak our chemical laws are and how many untested and unregulated chemicals like PFAS can very easily make their way into our drinking water. I learned the hard way, unfortunately, how important our environmental laws are in safeguarding our health, especially the health of our kids. 7 years ago, our community of Warminster and Horsham and the surrounding area was devastated to discover that our drinking water had been highly contaminated with PFAS for 50 years, with some of the highest levels of PFAS pollution ever detected in public drinking water wells. Naturally, as a mom, I started to read everything I could get my hands on about PFAS. And when I began researching the health effects, I learned that some of these chemicals can cross the placenta. It can affect a developing fetus. Animal studies showed that they cause tumors, cancer, neurodevelopmental problems, and even second-generation health effects. The magnitude of what I was uncovering, it hit me like a ton of bricks, and my mind raced back to an earlier time when my oldest son was diagnosed with a brain tumor at age 6. And you'll hear a little bit more about this in the video, but back then, after my son's surgery, epidemiologists came into our hospital room and they began drilling my husband and I with very pointed questions. Where do you live? Where do you work? Where was your early pregnancy? Have you or your husband ever worked with chemicals or pesticides? Here they had found embryonic tissue in the very center of my son's cancerous tumor. That meant it started to form during my pregnancy. Now there's 3 of us who grew up in Warminster on the same street, in fact, within a few houses of each other. All 3 of us have children of our own with brain tumors. All of the tumors were cancerous and they all had embryonic tissue at the core. Doctors immediately questioned our environmental exposures and we realized that we all drank PFAS contaminated water throughout our entire childhood, and we drank it during our pregnancies. As a mother, it was gut-wrenching for me to be told that my exposure might have actually caused my child's cancer. But what truly stuck with me, was learning that the Department of Defense and the chemical manufacturers had known since the 1970s just how poisonous PFAS are, yet they chose to be silent. They chose to let people in surrounding communities get sick and in some cases die without warning us. I then came to find out that the EPA also knew. They had known since 1998 just how toxic PFAS are. And the EPA too failed to protect our community. In my town where I grew up, we have 3-year-olds with kidney cancer who may never get a chance to do something as simple as ride a bike or put their first tooth under their pillow. There have been new moms who didn't feel that they could safely breastfeed their babies because of the high levels of PFAS in their breast milk. It's been 8 years now since we learned about the PFAS at our 2 military sites, yet the chemicals are still polluting our public waterways. It's the EPA's job to regulate chemicals, to set safe drinking water standards, and to hold polluters accountable, even when the polluter is the Department of Defense. And like many DoD sites across the country, we have these large uncontained PFAS plumes underground. And at the former Warminster Naval Air Base, the land has been redeveloped. And now there's a Gilda Radner Cancer Center there. There's a park and a playground for children, a retirement home. At that site that's already redeveloped, we have PFAS monitoring wells underground that are showing such high levels of PFAS that they needed to be turned into pump and extraction wells. We have area residents that are unsure if they or their children are going to suffer serious medical problems later in life due to the extent and duration of their exposure to PFAS. Make no mistake about it, the Department of Defense is actually one of the largest polluters in our country. And it's ironic that the very entity whose job it is to protect the American people ended up giving a lot of Americans cancer and other diseases because of the irresponsible way they handled toxic chemicals. My story is not unique. There are thousands of personal stories like mine across the country, PFAS-affected community members, stories of cancer, chronic illness, anger, frustration, loss of income, loss of our home values, loss of family pets, loss of hope, all at the hands of PFAS. But on the brighter side, for years, our neighbors in New Jersey have had safer drinking water than people here in Pennsylvania because they had a drinking water regulation for PFAS. But I just want to publicly thank the Delaware Riverkeeper and Tracy and the petition that they submitted to the state. And, we now have state drinking water regulations for PFAS. It's going to start to roll out soon, and this will save lives. I think that we are starting to make great progress with PFAS, but we have a long way to go. We still need to finalize the designation of PFAS as a hazardous substance. We need to finalize a federal drinking water standard for PFAS that's going to force the Department of Defense to comply with regulations. Hope, who's the co-founder of the Buxmont Coalition with me, a little bit about grassroots activism. The two of us, we grew up together, we went to school together, we came together later again in life through our personal experiences with cancer and our concerns that somehow it was related to PFAS. That's kind of bonded us. We started to work together. We were, of course, angry at the situation. We wanted to know why this happened. We want to know how something like this could happen. But we soon realized that, we couldn't change the past. We could only change the future. So we began to really shift our priorities from personal to more community-based. And the question started becoming, how can we prevent this from happening somewhere else? How can we raise more awareness in town? How can we get answers to our community's health, our community's concerns about health exposure? So by focusing on these questions, it put us on a journey from everyday residents and moms to advocates. Together, we formed the Buxmont Coalition for Safer Water, and now we find ourselves in meetings with the EPA, high-level EPA, high-level DOD, the Pennsylvania Governor's Task Force on PFAS. We provided congressional testimonies in Washington, D.C. And tonight, Hope and I want to share our personal stories, but we also want to share ways that we feel you can empower yourselves, either as individuals or as communities, to address the PFAS crisis. One very important way is we can do this is through health studies. They're expensive, they're hard to come by, But we all have a right to know what we were exposed to and what the health effects of our exposures are. And in order to better understand this, we worked together with Temple University on a small grant. It was a small PFAS health study, and it looked at the psychosocial effects of water contamination. This looked at things like anxiety, fear about your health, broken trust in our systems of protection, and financial implications. And we are currently working with Temple University, Brown University, the Pennsylvania Department of Health, on a large multi-site health study in our community to learn more about the health effects from having, drank this contaminated water for decades. To share some of the preliminary results from the health study, we had a pilot study a few years ago that did get completed, and it showed that we had much, much higher levels of PFAS in our bloodstream than the average Americans, which makes sense. It also showed that we had higher rates of cancer, several types of cancer, including kidney and childhood cancers, when we were compared to other communities within Pennsylvania. So right now, I was going to share two little snippets of videos in our community with other people, just giving 1-minute talks about how it's impacted them.
They took all these x-rays and they brought us out in the hallway, right? And they started counting on her lungs, and they counted to like 10, and then they went to her liver and counted to like 6, and then they went to both kidneys and started counting all these tumors. And me and my husband's like, that's the wrong x-ray. She told us she had kidney cancer, because again, at that point, we didn't realize that it could have spread.
My thought process is just why? Just why? Just why? And I don't know if I technically thought it was the water, but as the days grew on, it was in the back of the head. And then it hasn't left.
I find that there's something going on that's causing our children to be sick. It's so unfair. They didn't ask for this. They just asked, to live a normal life. We have put in a water filtration system, which I think is the only thing that actually saved my other 2 children from getting sick.
You don't have the cash to pay anybody to try to test it or to even consider testing it. It's trying, for the fact that I'm paying $14 to go down to the hospital to park. That's every day. I can't tell you how much time I've lost in work just alone. And if I'm not at work, I'm not getting paid. My wife, she can get paid for 3 months. And then on top of that, you want us to pay somebody to test our water, and it's already been too late.
We put a water filtration system in, and our water filtration system cost us $5,000 for the initial product to be installed into our home. And every year we had to maintain it, which costs anywhere from $250 to $400 every year.
We couldn't afford the filtration system, and we would get confused. We would go to the meetings and ask which filtration system to use, and then our concern was how they get rid of the filters then. Do they bury them in the ground? They come back through the water, and it was never really clear to us, and at that point we really didn't have money. If there's tight weeks, I make Felicia only drink the bottled water because she only has 3/4 of a kidney.
Hi everyone, I'm Hope Grosse, and I'm an affected community member as well, and co-founder with Joanne at Buxmont Coalition for Safer Water. And I just wanted to share my story with you. I was born in Warminster and 1964, and for the first 25 years of my life, I directly lived across the street from the Warminster Navy base. I'm one of 6, and we lived right on Kirk Road where the Warner Park was. Right down the block was the firefighting training center where firefighter foams containing PFAS were used and washed into the ground for over 50 years. We watched daily firefighting operations from our front porch. My family and many others had private well water. Public water was not available to us back then or to the houses surrounding our home until 1996, when TCE and PCE and many other volatile organic chemicals and heavy metals were found at high levels, and Warminster Navy Base was deemed a Superfund site. This was the first round of poisoning that we sustained. We didn't know about round 2, PFAS, until 18 years later. So our well, again, was in our front lawn, about 25 feet from the property, was the Navy base. There was a creek running alongside of our home that gathered runoff water from the base that went right into our well. There was a huge pipe, and we used to play in this pipe, play in the water that connected our property to the Navy. We had a gravel street. We not only drank this contaminated water, we brushed our teeth in it, we swam in it in our swimming pool, we showered in it. But the most sickening thing was that my mom made us baby formula mixed with this toxic water as infants. I, again, was one of 6, and we were all being poisoned unknowingly. It's ironic to think that we got hooked up in 1996 to safer water because of VOCs and heavy metals threatening our health. But little did we know that the poison continued, and the VOCs would be the least of our worries. Because growing up for me, all 8 of my family pets had cancerous tumors and died. In 1990, my dad passed away from cancer at 52. And it wasn't just our family. The neighbors down the street, the neighbor next to us, their father died of cancer. There was other debilitating diseases on the street. 3 months after burying my dad at 25, I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, which has been a really lifelong sentence for myself. During my treatments for one of the cancer, doctors repeatedly found and removed other rare tumors from my body. My sisters endured serious health issues, autoimmune issues, ovarian cysts, aortic aneurysms, all kinds of stuff that doesn't make sense. I lived in our family home until about 1989. My brother still owns it today and raised his family in that same home. I worked at the Navy base in Warminster during college for a year or so. There were other civilian workers there, dedicated military who drank this highly contaminated water on a daily basis as well. The military, like Joanne said, is one of the biggest polluters in our country. And not only did they bury this toxic waste, they routinely lit jet fuel on fire and put it out with firefighting foams. It was a toxic soup. The burn pits that they had across the street from my house. I think about today, even the smoke that I inhaled or consumed my whole life. And we all had these private wells. There were over 50 other chemicals in our well water. We've been dealt a lifelong sentence. And anytime something's wrong with myself, I immediately get filled with fear and think that it's cancer. For 25 years now, I've lived with this fear and exposures to these chemicals and what they've done to my body. Not only that, but the exuberant amount of money and time dealing with health issues, out-of-pocket expenses, losing family members, loved ones, neighbors, friends, loss of work. None of that can be given back to me. These are things that are lost. The worst part is when I think about me being exposed is my children, because we know that second-generation health effects from PFAS and other chemical exposures were passed through my umbilical cord and through my breast milk to my girls. So what should have been nourishment for my unborn babies was in fact poison. Poison that we're just learning about and hearing about that's been around for 50 years. And that does, as a mother, it's crippling, knowing that you could have poisoned your own children. Our family suffered lifelong devastations. And again, we're not alone. We have over 85,000 people just in our town. So this is a problem much grander today, much bigger. And I feel like it's a state of emergency where things have to be done sooner than later. Joanne and I got into this fight almost 10 years ago today. So we like she said, you know, we wanted revenge, we wanted the polluters to pay, and now we want that still, but we want it for our grandchildren and the young people who are coming into our community. We don't want anyone to suffer the way that we did and our community did. So the first way we can protect ourselves and our families is to have laws, PFAS state and federal drinking water laws. And once we have these laws, we can have some water testing and filtration systems. And if you happen to live in Warminster or Horsham area, they have installed these systems to a non-detect level of PFAS, which is amazing. But all the other towns around us, you know, we know this water travels in streams and creeks. But we also know that there's large plumes under the ground that still remain today and have extremely high levels of PFAS. I mean, the one up the street from me has in the 20,000 range, I believe, of PFAS still in the ground, in the soil. And it's a threat to our water source today, especially people with private wells. So testing is really important for everyone. And we have some links later that you can copy down that are places that you can get your water tested. Because even though PFAS, the regulations in PA are starting to come out, there's still going to be some time. So they're not yet regulating our drinking water. So many municipalities and water companies are not required to test yet. We also know that if you do get your water tested from a company, PFAS typically is not a standard part of a water test. So you have to go to a company who tests for just PFAS. And we also have links to those companies for you. Because a lot of these companies, they test for different things and they tell you your water's safe, but they are not testing for PFAS. So just be aware that you find a lab or a company that is testing for PFAS. And those tests, I found one today for free. I couldn't believe it. And I've saw other ones for maybe $80. So you can get your water tested, and you should, if you have a private well. I would, for my family's safety. Once you know if you have PFAS in your water, you need to find ways to get it out, to filter it. And there are plenty of systems out there that you can purchase, water filtration systems or GACs or our reverse osmosis that will remove and reduce most chemicals from your drinking water and PFAS. And there's information that we will share with you on that. You can do under the counter, you can do above the counter, and you can also go to the Buxmont Coalition for Safer Water website, which we have a link for that as well. There's whole house systems that can be purchased, like I said, under your sink, above the counter. So another way to empower yourself as well as knowledge is health studies, blood testing. We just completed the PA PFOS health study. That's finished. We had 1,200 participants. And those people today, most of them, and all of them will know what their PFAS exposure levels are. These blood results are helping individuals work proactively with their health providers to get early screening for diseases and cancers that we know are linked to PFAS. Biomonitoring or blood testing for PFAS is so important. Unfortunately, the tests are very expensive because insurance is not covering them yet, but we're hoping with these federal laws, hopefully coming soon, that this will be a future thing, but they're upwards of $500 to have your blood tested. But there are companies that you can actually mail in and have it sent to your home. You can prick your finger. So there are more opportunities and places coming out with these tests, which is a good thing. They're home tests, like I said, which is a whole lot easier than going to a lab. And finally, the real solution to this problem is politics and laws that regulate PFAS. So we encourage you to get involved, as ugly as it can be. Pressure your elected officials. Be sure to vote. I mean, vote and do some research on candidates that stand for our environmental issues, because, you know, we can't live comfortably and, you know, have a full life when we're sick, ill, and stressed out and all the above. So we really appreciate you coming tonight, and thank you.
Thank you, Hope. Hi, Tracy Carluccio here again from Delaware Riverkeeper Network. So I'm going to touch on some of the basics relating to PFAS in Pennsylvania, and then also nationally what's been happening. So first of all, we think about just what are PFAS, and this has already been covered to some degree by both Joanne and Hope, but I'm just going to go through the basics in case people don't realize that per and poly-fluoroalkyl substances, PFAS for short, are a group of thousands of federally unregulated, highly toxic chemicals, which include the most commonly found here in Pennsylvania, which are PFOA and PFOS. They're also the most commonly found across most of the states. PFAS compounds are in our drinking water throughout the state of Pennsylvania. They're in our environment, as you heard from Hope and Joanne. They're in surface water, soil, groundwater. They're throughout our environment in Pennsylvania. And in certain places, they're found at very high levels in Pennsylvania, such as the military bases, the 3 bases where Hope and Joanne grew up, where for decades it was released through firefighting foam. It's also used in manufacturing, so it's found in other places in Pennsylvania. You'll find it at airports, at firefighting schools, and other military facilities in Pennsylvania. So it's a statewide problem. And PFAS are found in most people's blood at about a level of about 4. And above that level is the level that Joanne was talking about when she said, we have higher levels here in Bucks and Montgomery counties than we do in the rest of the nation. The rest of the nation has about 4. And if you've been exposed to higher levels, then you end up with higher levels in your blood. PFAS are found in our air, in our water, and they're found in other media as well, other environmental media. And we'll get into that later in our presentation. They're called forever chemicals. You've heard that over and over, probably in the news most lately. And that's because they don't biodegrade. They don't break down on their own. And they are bioaccumulative. They build up in living beings. So what are the health threats from this? Well, one thing about PFAS is they are highly toxic in tiny doses. PFOA and PFOS build up in the body, they build up in your blood, and they're very difficult to excrete. It takes years to get it out of your body once you've been exposed. But the importance of understanding that minuscule doses can affect you is that when you drink water that's contaminated with PFAS, even if it's only a little bit, it builds up and is amplified in your body. So that's why the maximum contaminant levels of the safe drinking water standards that you see are so low, and they're measured in parts per trillion. A lot of toxic chemicals are measured in parts per billion, much greater amount of a chemical in order to have an adverse health effect. PFOA and PFOS have adverse health effects in tiny, tiny levels. And drinking water is the most is the greatest exposure route, but also we find it in fish, and we find it in other food. We find it in consumer products, air, dust, and we can talk more about that. But the most important thing I'd like to point out here is that the diseases are very serious. Kidney cancer, testicular cancer, the other cancers that you heard about from Hope and Joanne, thyroid disease, high cholesterol, preeclampsia or pregnancy-induced hypertension, ulcerative colitis. Also, and one of the most devastating, are the developmental effects that it can have on the fetus, infants, and children, our most vulnerable population. And those include low infant birth weight and other developmental effects that end up marking an individual for their entire lives if they're exposed to high levels in those early years. It also affects the immune system, including decreased vaccine response, which was very important during the pandemic. And it basically damages the liver and other organs as well, but damaging effects to the liver are found in almost all of the animal studies that have been done and also correlate with liver disease in human beings. EPA and their most recent action that they've taken to propose regulations, which we'll talk about in a second, has named PFOA and PFOS as likely carcinogens. This is the first time they have done that. It was named by others as likely carcinogens such as in Europe, but not here. EPA just did that in the last 2 weeks. So what's going on? Well, in Pennsylvania, you heard Joanne and Hope, Pennsylvania has adopted maximum contaminant levels, or what's called MCLs, or safe drinking water standards. And that's for two of the most commonly found, PFOA and PFOS. They were adopted this year in January, but they don't go into effect until January of 2024 for the larger water systems, and the smaller water systems in January of 2025. And they do not cover private wells. Very important for people to understand. We, as a community here in Pennsylvania working on PFAS, advocated for changes to make the Pennsylvania regulations stricter. We wanted a lower level to be adopted, and we wanted them to apply to private wells and many other implementation and monitoring issues. But they did adopt the 14 and the 18. It's a start, but I'll talk a little more about how that could change. So right now we have no federal maximum contaminant levels, but proposed rulemaking was made just this month after decades of advocacy. They've known about this problem at the federal government level really since the 70s, but particularly in the 90s and then in the early 2000s because of Rob Bilott, who wrote the book Exposure, and we'll have a link to that, brought it to the attention of the EPA when it was found in West Virginia and Ohio in drinking water. The proposed MCLs at the federal level are for PFOA and PFOS at 4 parts per trillion for each. And we can talk a little bit about that if you want more information. And for 4 other PFAS compounds through a measure that they use called a mixtures method, where they set a hazard level, and if the 4, either one of them or all of them, exceed a certain hazard level, then they have to remove it from the water. And that's all explained in the rulemaking. So just today, the federal government published the rulemaking. They had a pre-publication out 2 weeks ago, but just today it's been published, and you can comb through that. The link is going to be on the final slide. If the federal standards are adopted as proposed, Pennsylvania will be required to lower their PFOA and PFOS maximum contaminant levels to comply with that, and they will also have to adopt the standards that the federal government adopts for the other 4 PFAS compounds. Just want to say before we leave this that we have to clean up our sources of contamination. As Hope and Joanne said, we have this saturated in our environment. And if we don't stop, first of all, the continuing migration of PFAS compounds from sources, and then clean it up where we know it exists, we're never going to get ahead of this problem. So we are advocating, of course, for the drinking water standards, because we got to get it out of our water immediately. That's urgent. But we also want the polluters to pay, to be made accountable, to clean up these sources, even if we have to use tax money to start with, and there is some tax money coming from the Infrastructure Trust Fund from the Biden administration to get it started. But we need it all cleaned up. We need all sources to be stopped, and we need all products that contain it to be banned, and that's not the case now. We also need, again, for the polluters to pay for that. So finally, I just want to say that under the Safe Drinking Water Act of Pennsylvania, the drinking water standards for PFOA and PFOS, the MCLs, were adopted. That's the authority they have to do that. Delaware Riverkeeper Network filed a petition with the Environmental Quality Board years back asking for this to happen. And we didn't get any action out of it, so then we had to sue the state of Pennsylvania. And we sued them to force them to adopt MCLs for PFOA. And many years later, it actually has happened. And the bedrock reason, the fundamental reason that that has happened is because of Article 1, Section 27 of the Pennsylvania Constitution. And you can read it here, but the words I've highlighted, pure water, is why we have to, and the government has to, give us pure water that does not endanger our health, that is safe. So finally, I just want to say that there is a tremendous amount of public involvement in this issue. There's many organizations that are involved in Pennsylvania. You've heard from Joanne, you've heard from Hope, and we're going to have links to those, to their organization and also to ours. We want you to get involved, because only because we advocated from the bottom up did anything ever happen in Pennsylvania or at the federal level. And here are some links. All of this is going to go into the chat. Don't expect you to write these down right now, I just want you to see that there's going to be a lot of information that you can dig into. And I recommend you read Rob Bilot's book, Exposure. It's a real page turner. I couldn't put it down. I read it in one sitting. And then finally, here are the links to our organizations, our email addresses, and you will also be getting this in the chat. And afterwards, once we send this recording out, all of this information will be sent out to you with the recording. There will also be available, as Soraya said at the beginning, on YouTube for free for all people, so that link can be shared with the public. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to turn it over to Anneke. And Anneke van Rossum is going to be picking up the next piece of this, looking at fish and wildlife. Go ahead, Anneke. Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. Hi, I'm Anneke van Rossum, and I am the Advocacy and Policy Coordinator over here at Delaware Riverkeeper Network. And I'm going to be talking to you guys about PFAS and its effect on wildlife. So I'm just going to share my screen. All right, so I use forever chemicals as the term. So I do less acronyms, but as Tracy said, PFOA and PFOS are what you're going to be looking for. So to start, I think it's always good to talk about how does this get into our system. And as you can see this graphic, which I'll talk about later, Delaware Riverkeeper Network has 4 fish advisories. Same advisory, 4 different languages to talk about the different effects of PFAS and PFOA, to learn about the different fish and how often you should or should not be eating them, recommendations on how to prepare the fish. So I'll have links for that at the end, and they should also be posted in the chat. So this graphic is thanks to that fish advisory. You can find it, but essentially it gets into our system the way a lot of other things do, through runoff or discharge from manufacturing facilities, right into our water, right into our air. And then it does stick to the soil particles, and then it moves up through those small organisms in the soil. And just like kind of how everybody learns in biology 101, it kind of moves up the food chain. So it starts in the soil, and those little bugs and detritus at the bottom eat it up, and then we move back up through the food chain, and they get eaten by bigger and bigger and bigger animals. And as you probably know, that wouldn't just stay in fish. They can also be picked up by birds that are then eating those fish, and also humans, which I will get into shortly. Next slide. So where has it been found? So you're going to hear me talk about fish primarily, but PFAS has actually been, PFAS, forever chemicals, PFOA, has actually been found in more than 330 species of animals. And that ranges from fish to polar bears, which is crazy and insane. And anything I talk about too, I would like everybody to keep in mind that 330 animals is not the maximum. Those are only the animals that have been able to be tested for this. So the number could be so much larger than we actually know. So any location or things, it's where it has been tested. So this could be way more far reaching than we even know. But something even crazy is too, it's even found in deer. So in 2018, Michigan had to issue a warning on consuming deer because of the PFAS that was found in the organs and meat, and that's still being researched to this day, the actual effect it has. And as you can see, again, from our nice little graphic that you can find in the DRN fish advisory, you can see how it moves up and up the food chain, from phytoplankton to zooplankton to small fish, and the larger fish that you probably see all your friends posting about on their social media. So what does the data show us? So there are fish with detectable levels of PFAS found in all 48 continental US states. I think there's a new study that says it's in all 50. I couldn't find that one, but so at least in all the continental 48 US states. And then monitoring in the US has shown that fish that are caught near PFAS contaminated areas have higher levels than commercially sold fish. That's not to say that commercially sold fish also don't have PFAS in them. It has even been found to be in seafood that you buy at the grocery store, even so far as fish sticks and tuna and shrimp like that. But it is higher near those contaminated sites. And just to show, again, while I'm talking about wildlife, I want people to think also about, a lot of people aren't just fishing because it's fun. They're not just fishing to share it. People are fishing for survival. People are fishing because they can't make the grocery bill, or they have no income, or even because it's a part of their culture. So there's an estimated 17.6 million high frequency consumers of fish in the US over age 18. And the highest mean contribution of that population is Black and non-Hispanic. And again, going back to the average PFOS and total PFAS concentrations were 1.5 and 1.6 times higher in urban locations. And you might say, well, I don't really picture Philadelphia or Camden or whatever city you're thinking of as people fishing. You might not see it. You might not even imagine that's a hobby. But these are actually screenshots I got from an app called FishBrain. And so people can go and they can log and share photos of the fish that they have been catching. And so these are both taken screenshots of down by Philadelphia. So I have on the left side over by Penn Terminal and over on the right side by Boeing. And even by the Boeing area, you can see in this one little dot, there's 863 fish catches logged. Over at Penn Terminal, you have 204, 245, 289, all in these general locations. So people are fishing. People are fishing every day, and people are fishing a lot in cities near PFAS and PFOA contaminated sites and factories. And again, sometimes it's for enjoyment and sometimes it's for survival. So I just want everybody to keep that in mind, that when maybe we talk about eating less fish or lowering that, while sure that might be an option for some, it's really not for others. So when I talk to you about the consumption of fish and deer, again, many people are fishing for fun, but also it's for survival. And something to think about too is the person catching the fish isn't also necessarily keeping the fish just for them. There was a study in Tampa Bay done where actually 97% of the respondents of that study said that they ate the fish they caught themselves, but also almost half of them ended up sharing it with their friends and neighbors. So again, we're this sense of community that we get over food, this sense of sharing. So it's not just those individuals. Those 863 catches could have been dispersed amongst hundreds of people. It's not just one person. You might not even realize that refugees are also at risk of PFOA and PFOS. The New York Department of Health, actually, scientists published a study finding that refugees that were in Syracuse, who were originally from Burma, who were fishing for food or because it was something that they culturally did, had elevated levels of PFAS concentration in their blood. And again, too, this idea of we'll just eat less fish, just eat less seafood. A lot of Native Americans actually fish and hunt for reasons because it is owed to them through treaty rights, and also for cultural and history reliance. As a oral tradition, oral history community, people who teach future generations through actually doing and practicing and going out with each other, it's not so easy to just not go out and do it. And actually, some tribes, there is this system of belief that through hunting, through harvesting, through fishing, you are being a good steward to the land, you are being a good steward to Creator. And actually, if you cease to do those things, then those things will cease to be provided to you. So it's so deeply rooted, it's not as simple as just eat less. And again, like I talked about with deer, while there aren't that many studies yet in PA about PFOA or PFOS in deer, it's important to remember the potential impacts if it's happened in Michigan. We can't say that it can't happen elsewhere. And in PA, I think it was interesting that over 100,000 pounds of venison, which is deer meat if you don't know, was donated to more than 5,000 food banks, soup kitchens, and mission outreach centers. So again, it's not just the person killing the animal and consuming them themselves. These are actually far-reaching health effects and people that are going to these places who don't have access to any other food. And so that is what they're relying on. And yeah, if you eat it, you got it. There's not really, a study showed that sheep who ate PFAS contaminated corn actually only excreted 6% of that back after 21 days. So cooking it has really little effect. And if you didn't know too, if you have nonstick cookware, that also has PFOA and PFOS in it. So don't cook your fish on nonstick cookware. But cooking really has shown to have little effect to it. And like I said, it's not so easy to say just eat less and reduce your exposure, but for many people, but to the extent you're able to, try to do that. And as I have here at the bottom, this is something we have in the DRN fish advisory. So If most of the fish you eat are in the eat no more than 1 meal per week category, you shouldn't exceed 52 meals per year. And if most of the fish you eat are in the eat no more than 1 meal per month category, you should not exceed 12 meals per year. And again, just bringing it back to the subsistence fishing, telling people, 52 meals a year, people might need that to survive, or really that's their only meal that they're going to get. And so to close out, thank you for listening. Thank you for that. You can always join us and learn more at Delaware Riverkeeper Network. This is an important issue to us. And these are the 4 languages. We have it in English, Spanish, Vietnamese. Oh, it disappeared. Did it go back? There we go. Vietnamese and Khmer. So I have these little QR codes you can scan. There's also bit.lys. They should be shared in the chat when you can find them on the DRN website. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Anneke. So we're going to go right into our Q&A. Let's try to take a few questions.
All right. So I see here our first question in the chat. How are PFAS removed from the environment?
Well, they remove them from groundwater by putting them through a granular activated carbon system. In some cases, reverse osmosis is used, but not usually for a groundwater treatment system. They also remove the soil. It's a real problem what to do with the soil, because the Army was actually burning it. And when you incinerate it, the PFAS do not break down. They can break down into different PFAS compounds, or they can stay as they were and be emitted to the air, and then people breathe them in, or they drop back down on the surface, contaminating water and vegetation, again, land. So there's not a perfect destruction method that has been found yet. There is a lot of technological advances, but in terms of removing it from the environment as opposed to drinking water, it's similar type of filtration system, but then they have to get rid of that residue in the very end, because what you're doing is filtering it out and capturing the particles that are contaminated. Those particles really should go to hazardous waste. Really, it should be something similar to where they store radioactive waste. Basically, keeping it forever away from the environment, segregated from the environment, in order to be completely effective. Joanne, you want to add to that, or anyone else?
Yeah, that was a very complete answer.
Okay, was there a question we missed?
Yes, it's what has been done to get information about the contamination and risk to people who moved in and out of the area, servicemen and women, summer camps, things like that?
Well, I can try to answer that one. As far as the people who were exposed through the contaminated drinking water, the first thing that happened was everybody got letters sent to their home. So if you were a current resident or you're residing in the household that was exposed at one time, everybody got a letter. And because of the health study, and I guess because of costs and different things, no former residents have been notified. I can tell you that right now, unless it's just through word of mouth. Through the health study, more letters went out to all of the people to invite them to be part of the health study and to let them know that they were exposed. We're also doing social media, tons of social media blasts to try to get the word out about the contamination. And you'd be surprised, people still don't know. You'd really be surprised. As far as summer camps and things like that, again, letters have gone out, but mostly to residents. I would have to say there wasn't a big push at businesses, which because our health study was dealing with residential use of drinking water. However, think about it, if you worked at a high school, I know we have some teachers on this call. If you work at a school, you're drinking water all day, sometimes more at work than you are at home. And unfortunately, there wasn't a big outreach there. But through the health study, like I said, we did do some. As far as servicemen and women, I want to sadly report that they have never been, the Department of Defense has yet to tell their servicemen that they have been exposed to PFAS. And we find that disgraceful. Hope and I are working on that. We're talking to the DOD, we're lobbying, we're talking to the Veterans Affairs and letting them know that we find it horrific that these people who have served our country are not being told about their exposure. We need laws. So thank you.
All right. And so our next question, is by Cindy. Can public water utilities implement processes to remove PFOs and PFOA?
Well, yes, that's what the new law that has been adopted by Pennsylvania and the one that's been proposed at the federal level require. And right now it is actually already being used in many communities voluntarily ahead of the regulations. The thing I mentioned, granular activated carbon, it's a filtration system. Also reverse osmosis is another system. And there are technological advances that are coming up with new treatment methods as well. But yes, it can be removed. Those systems have been used for decades already to remove other compounds. So they're very tried and true. They do cost money for a treatment facility to implement them, but it is not prohibitive, especially if we get those polluters to pay for it through putting money into a spill fund like they do in many states. Also, Pennsylvania has a way of collecting money as well through a fund. So it's very important that we get that money from the companies that caused the problem, but the methods for doing it are absolutely there. And one of the good things about putting those systems in, and I think Hope mentioned, or Joanne, I think actually mentioned this earlier, it removes other contaminants as well. So you get multiple benefits out of having a water supplier invest in these treatment systems. They will remove other very toxic and dangerous compounds as well. So this is where we really should be going anyway with our water systems, because we live, face it, in a polluted environment. We got to get this out of our water.
Well, actually, we have a question here. The Philadelphia Parks and Rec Department is determined to install some 25 acres of synthetic performance turf at FDR Park in South Philadelphia. They claim the product will be PFAS free. We know that such product does not exist. The creeks and wetlands in the park and the Delaware River drain into will be polluted by the microplastics and the PFAS. Question is, what do we know about the impacts of human and animals coming into contact with PFAS and toxic artificial turf? And how can the manufacturers blatantly lie about the inherent dangers of these products?
Joanne, go ahead, and then I'll add if
Well, I hope I now lost connection, but she's deeply involved in this in our community. If she can jump in by phone, but I just want to say that Graham Peasley, who's a doctor out of Notre Dame, is studying this. People are sending him little pieces of artificial turf and having him run tests on it. It is highly toxic. I don't know if any of you are following, but they're suspecting that possibly the artificial turf from the vet caused many cancers. I don't know if you've heard about that, about all the baseball players and football players that play down there. So there's studies being done. Actually, Notre Dame is the one conducting those studies right now. They actually got a piece of turf sent to them. So we don't know the human health studies because I don't think there's been a lot of tests on it, but we do know that this artificial turf does contain PFAS at high levels. There's always new kinds, and every manufacturer is always saying that it doesn't contain it, but yet when it seems to get mailed into Graham, he says he's finding it. So I think it's on a case by case. Tracy, you might have more updated information.
No, we're very much opposed to FDR Park using artificial turf. Delaware Riverkeeper Network has fought artificial turf for more than a decade for a lot of reasons. There are other chemicals. There's bacteria that grows on it, and kids have gotten very sick from sports fields over the years being exposed to artificial turf. So the PFAS content, you're absolutely right. The questioner here, and of course Joanne, that it's in the artificial turf, and it's only by testing that you really find out what's in these things, because as the question said, how can they lie about these things? Well, DuPont lied forever, 3M lied forever, Solvay lied forever. All of these corporations are in it to make a lot of money. They do not prioritize public health, and they really are all about their bottom line, and that's why they lie. I'm sorry to be so blunt, but they lie to cover up. And unfortunately, many of our legislators and our government agencies have gone along with it. because of what you can call agency capture, the capture of agencies by corporations. And that's a whole nother, issue. But when Hope said at the end of hers, got to get involved in politics, this is part of it. Getting involved in, voting for people and asking candidates when they're running for office, what do you think about PFAS and artificial turf? What do you think about PFAS in the environment, and who should be cleaning it up and who should pay for it? So that's all I have to add.
Well, there was one other question that came in. It said, I heard a news report referencing a court decision which ruled out that medical costs related to PFAS exposure will not be recoverable. Can you comment on this issue? So not only will they put it in the environment, then when you have to have medical costs associated with it, will those costs be recoverable?
Is this for DOD or for industry? Because for the Department of Defense, nobody can sue them. They have immunity. But as far as for industrial sites, I'm not sure if the question is specific to a specific like polluter or what.
It was a court decision that ruled that medical costs related to PFAS exposure will not be recoverable. So it must be industrial.
Well, I would say one thing is that maybe the questioner can send the link to the court decision, because we know there are ongoing lawsuits. Rob Bellot has brought a class action suit on behalf of every American in order to be made whole, and it covers medical costs. It covers medical monitoring and medical costs in his claim. So, and there have been many lawsuits that have been brought and won by people who have won the cover to have their medical costs covered. So I think maybe there was, maybe one decision. If you can send that along, we'll look at it. But overall, it is absolutely worth going to court and fighting for these. And there are people doing it throughout the United States and in Europe as well.
And we're also trying to fight at the political level. There's a lot of laws that haven't been passed yet, but they are in the process. They're either in the House or in the Senate that haven't been passed, that are requiring polluters to pay for biomonitoring for those affected.
That's right. Thank you.
I can't recall whether this one was covered. Is the NADC being considered as a potential Superfund NPL site?
You mean the former, these bases have had so many names, it's hard to keep up with. You mean the Naval Air Developmental Center in Morris?
Yes, I think
it already is. It was established as a national priority NPL site, and it was closed and it was redeveloped. And it was because of the PFAS that was identified as having been used there that the site is now reopened. So the EPA it's back as an open site. Does that make sense? For cleanup purposes.
Okay. I do have one for Anneke. Anneke, can you cut fish a certain way to remove the PFOA for consumption, for fish consumption?
Yeah, so in our DRN fish advisory, you can find that. The links are in the chat. So you can't cut them and totally remove the PFAS, unfortunately, from what we know. But there are things recommended, such as removing the skin from the fish, slice off the belly fat along the bottom of the fish, cut away any fat that's above the backbone. And then there's a V-shaped wedge of fat along, it says the lateral line of the fish, so you can cut that out. So you can cut apart the fish to reduce your exposure. Definitely if you're going to eat fish, I would recommend doing that. And like I said, in our fish advisory, we have tips and explanations, and there's a good graphic too of the fish to kind of show where you can cut them apart. But there's no way specifically that I could tell you to cut it that you wouldn't still get some PFAS, unfortunately.
And to follow up on that, is PFOA or PFOS only found in our waterways and animals, or can it enter the body through other methods?
It can enter the body through breathing it in. It can be moved by air, and it can enter your body through breathing it in, and also dust in your house, breathing in that dust. Food products like vegetables grown on land, milk products. They're in Maine, whole dairy herds have had to be destroyed because their milk was contaminated with PFAS. So it's a sorry story about how completely PFAS compounds have saturated all of so many environmental media and can be taken into our body through many different ways. Along those lines, I just put into the chat some information links on consumer products. Cosmetics are a big user of PFAS. They're in your dental floss, they're in your makeup, they're in toothpaste, but there are products that don't have these in them. So there's also a link to where to go and find safe products on the EWG website. But there's 2 other links that talk about the cosmetics and also consumer products because they're used as Joanne mentioned earlier, or I mean, Anneke mentioned earlier, they're used in nonstick frying pans. Teflon was the original. And you see all these advertisements, oh, it's green or it's non-PFA. Don't use them, okay? Just don't buy the nonstick coated cookware. And that's because what we're finding out very sadly is many of the compounds that have been put into use and approved by the EPA to replace the most toxic compounds such as PFOA and PFOS are turning out to not be any better, and in some cases to actually be more toxic than what they were supposed to replace. So the most important thing is do not have Stainmaster or any sort of coating for waterproofing or stain resistance on your upholstery. Look at your products, because if it says per fluoro or fluoro in the ingredients, that's a tip-off. They're not required to put into the product list PFAS at this time, but many you can do a little detective work and look for that fluoro or per fluoro in the ingredient list, and then don't buy it. But these links there are very helpful, because one of the ways that we take it in just unconsciously is through using products that have these materials in them. And there is a whole movement nationwide, for instance, to have REI say that they're not going to sell PFAS imbued products any longer because they are used on waterproof outdoor wear, and Kevlar canoes have PFAS in them. So there's a lot of different sources you don't know about. Go to those links, you'll find out more about it. But trying to limit what you take in is important, although nothing is more important than getting it out of your drinking water, because it is the major source and you can't get away without drinking water.
And maybe one more question. What does blood sampling tell a person about the risk of developing a disease related to PFAS exposure?
Is hope, well, it could tell you a lot. Up until like 6 months ago, it couldn't tell you anything. It was just a number. And we had no, imagine going to the doctors and someone telling you your hemoglobin is, say, 8, but there's no reference range next to it. That's kind of what it was like for PFAS for the last few years. But over the summer, NASAM, which is the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, came out with some type of a guideline for the public to be able to get your PFAS blood results and have something to show you. On our website, and it's one of the links that you're going to get following this, it's going to include the NASAM guidance to PFAS results and how to read them. Basically, it puts you in a category from this range to this range. It will tell you if you are at risk for certain diseases and what diseases they would be, and recommendations for your physician to test you for preventative reasons.
Yeah, so there are huge leaps being made in science and health assessments on this. So thank you, Joanne. I think we've gone over 25 minutes now. And if you have a question that you didn't get to ask, or we missed it, please, when you get the email from us that will have all the information in the chat, it will have all the links, it will have our slides. When you get that, please reply to us if there's a question that you have that didn't get answered, because we'll be very happy to continue this conversation. And thank you to everybody. I see almost every single person stuck through the long-winded extra time here, so we greatly appreciate your participation. And just say goodbye and thank you again. And turn it over to anyone else who wants to say bye.
Well, thank you for joining us, and thanks to all of you for putting together a great host of information that we all need to go home and kind of take a look at. And I understand that a follow-up email will be coming with all of the links so that everybody will have all of the information that we put out there. So thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.